through the appropriations process. I'm grateful to the chairman for this conversation and his perspective on these critical issues, and I yield to the gentleman.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you for his active support of education in all forms. We'll be happy to work with the gentleman as we move forward to ensure that NSF and other agencies in this bill are getting the most appropriate direction on STEM education needs and priorities.
I thank the gentleman. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Yields back his time. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from West Virginia. For purposes, the gentleman from West Virginia seek recognition.
Chairman, I rise for the purpose of a colloquy with the chairman.
Does the gentleman move to strike the last word? Does the gentleman move to strike the last word?
I rise for the purpose of a colloquy with the chairman.
Does the gentleman move to strike the last word?
Yes.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman. Okay. Mr. Chairman, thank you for this opportunity to discuss one of my top priorities with you today. NOAA's comprehensive large data array stewardship system, otherwise known as CLASS. This program has been funded at the same base level of $6.5 million for each of the past 10 years, despite an increase in their mission. This is NOAA's enterprise system for handling all of its environmental data critical for weather predictions. Simply put, CLASS therefore must rely on programs within the satellite program to overcome their $24 million funding shortfall. We should be creating certainty, Mr. Chairman, for the NOAA CLASS program instead of expecting them to rely on these other satellite programs to transfer funds for their own budget to CLASS. Under last year's budget, CLASS fell short of the necessary funding to sustain core mission values. Mission failure, CLASS, will continue if we don't provide CLASS with funding certainty this year and not depend on transfers from other satellite programs. Mr. Chairman, I ask that the Appropriation Committee consider the importance of the CLASS mission in conference and encourage the Chairman to adequately fund their mission, a mission defined as a level of funding equal to last year and no job losses. Mr. Chairman?
If the gentleman would yield.
I yield.
And I saw you looked at me, so I got to be careful we say this right. I want to thank the gentleman for speaking on this issue. Funding the weather satellites is a very high priority in this bill, as well as the data systems used to store and process data from the satellites. We will work with you and also our other colleagues in the body to ensure that the CLASS program is adequately funded.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to working with you on this matter.
Thank you, Mr. McKinley.
Gentleman yields back his time. Gentleman's time is expired. Who seeks recognition?
Gentleman from Colorado, 12 points. Who seeks recognition?
Who seeks recognition? We're ready for something.
Louisiana.
Gentleman from Louisiana. For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Can the gentleman kindly specify the amendment?
It is the turtle exclusion device amendment. I don't have the number.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Okay, they got his title. Insert the following section. None of the funds made available by this Act may be used to implement a proposed rule for turtle excluder devices as described in the Southeast Fishery Bulletin published by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration on May 8, 2012.
Gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. NOAA and the fishing industry has had a long history of working together. Since the 1990s, NOAA had worked with the fishing industry to develop a regulatory system that provides meaningful protection to turtles while at the same time not economically harming our fishermen. Under the system, fishermen had agreed that they would periodically remove their nets from the water, allowing any turtles trapped in the net to escape. By offering to do so, they would substitute the use of they would not have to use the turtle exclusion devices. Now, NOAA intends to regulate these shrimpers and force them to use TEDs. The recent rulemaking negates this partnership and places the whims of environmentalists ahead of the scientific data or economic well-being of the fishermen and the coastal communities. There is no scientific data that's proving that the lack of the use of TEDs by shrimpers are causing any additional deaths in the turtle population. Over 60% of the shrimp landed in Louisiana is by inshore and nearshore fleets, which is primarily skimmers and butterflies. This regulation, if implemented, will affect thousands of fishermen in Louisiana. Fishermen will lose money due to the cost of the TEDS equipment and also the money from loss of catch, and also a loss of money from the catch. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from California.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I move to oppose the gentleman's amendment. Turtle excluder devices are already required in other shrimp trawl fisheries in the Gulf of Mexico and South Atlantic to reduce sea turtle bycatch. In many cases, fishermen have reported actually preferring the use of TEDs in their trawl nets because when they're used properly, TEDs allow up to 98% of turtles to escape from trawl nets while retaining up to 97% of target shrimp catch. TEDs also provide other economic benefits to fishermen, again, when installed properly, that can prevent other species bycatch and unwanted marine debris from entering the trawl nets, thereby increasing shrimp catch efficiency and the quality of their shrimp catch. TEDs can also cut down on unwanted debris which can damage and increase the drag in fishing nets, causing fishermen to incur other costs. At this stage, NMFS is merely proposing this rule and will provide ample opportunity for public comment, including public meetings, before any final regulation is in place, and therefore I urge defeat of the amendment and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Louisiana. All those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it. The amendment is not adopted.
I'd like a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Louisiana will be postponed. Gentleman from Colorado. For what purposes does the gentleman from Colorado seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
Could the gentleman kindly specify the amendment?
The amendment concerns the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Asset Forfeiture Fund.
Clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 32, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Gardner of Colorado.
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the chairman of the subcommittee as well for his work and leadership on this bill today and yesterday. I voted long into the morning this morning and certainly appreciate his time and consideration. The appropriations bills before us present an opportunity to provide oversight that is one of the most important duties and functions of this Congress, to make sure that we are looking at the ways our federal agencies, our administration is spending money and making sure that it is carried out properly. One of the areas where I believe this Congress needs to further its oversight and step up its oversight concerns the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Asset Forfeiture Fund. This is money that is comprised of fines paid for by individuals who violate the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act. The Act, as many members know, is the primary law governing fish management in our federal waters, and it's responsible for managing fisheries, promoting conservation, producing bycatch, and ending overfishing. The money in NOAA's Asset Forfeiture Fund can only be used for express purposes that are laid out in statute, such as paying costs associated with providing for temporary storage of property seized during civil or criminal proceedings, paying off valid liens or mortgages or forfeited property, or reimbursing any agency that assisted NOAA in enforcing the law. Unfortunately, what we have seen is a pattern of unaccountability, a pattern of abuse of this money, including a purchase of a $300,000 yacht that was used for personal use by certain officials within NOAA. This amendment simply says that the money out in the asset forfeiture fund should only be used for those express purposes as defined in statute, making sure that these abuses do not continue, and making sure that this Congress steps up its role in oversight when it comes to funds of the United States. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I would yield back my time and ask for a yes vote on the amendment to make sure that we are accountable for the funds from the taxpayer.
The gentleman's time has expired. Who seeks recognition? The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Colorado. Those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it.
I would ask for a recorded vote on a very good accountability.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Colorado will be postponed. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from New York.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk. On May 24th, 2011...
Gentlemen, to suspend. The clerk will designate the amendment.
Amendment number 28, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Engel of New York.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On May 24th, 2011, President Obama issued a memorandum on federal fleet performance, which requires all new light-duty vehicles in the federal fleet to be alternate fuel vehicles, such as hybrid, electric, natural gas, or biofuel, by December 31st, 2015. My amendment echoes the presidential memorandum by prohibiting funds in the Commerce, Justice, and Science Appropriations Bill from being used to lease or purchase new light-duty vehicles except in accord with the president's memorandum. Last year, I introduced similar amendments to 4 different appropriations bills: Agriculture, Defense, Energy, and Homeland Security. All were accepted and passed by voice vote. Our transportation sector is by far the biggest reason we send $600 billion per year to hostile nations to pay for oil at ever-increasing costs. But America doesn't need to be dependent on foreign sources of oil for transportation fuel. Alternative technologies exist today that, when implemented broadly, will allow any alternative fuel to be used in America's automotive fleet. The federal government operates the largest fleet of light-duty vehicles in America. According to GSA, there are over 660,000 vehicles in the federal fleet, with over 41,000 being used by the Department of Justice and another 2,400 with the Department of Commerce. By supporting a diverse array of vehicle technologies in our federal fleet, we will encourage development of domestic energy resources, including biomass, natural gas, agricultural waste, hydrogen, and renewable electricity. Expanding the role these energy sources play in our transportation economy will help break the leverage over Americans held by foreign government-controlled oil companies, and will increase our nation's domestic security and protect consumers from price spikes and shortages in the world oil markets. So I ask that you support the Engel Amendment. On a similar note, I've worked with my colleagues John Shimkus and Roscoe Bartlett and Steve Israel to introduce the bipartisan Open Fuel Standard Act, H.R. 1687. I particularly worked with Congressman Shimkus on this bill in this Congress. Our bill would require 50% of new automobiles in 2014, 80% in 2016, and 95% in 2017 to be warranted to operate on non-petroleum fuels in addition to or instead of petroleum-based fuels. Compliance possibilities include the full array of existing technologies, including flex fuel, natural gas, hydrogen, biodiesel, plug-in electric drive, and fuel cell. and a catch-all for all new technologies. So in conclusion, I encourage my colleagues to support my amendment and the open fuel standard as we work toward breaking our dependence on foreign oil. And I yield back.
The gentleman's time has expired. For purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
Strike the requisite number of words.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I think this amendment's been adopted on other bills. We accept the amendment. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Florida. All those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, no. The opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the amendment's adopted. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman, for what purpose does the gentleman from Illinois seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
Would the gentleman kindly specify the amendment?
Amendment 24.
Yeah, the date's there.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Walsh of Illinois. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following section. None of the funds made available in this act for the State Criminal Alien Assistance Program under the heading Department of Justice, State and Local Law Enforcement Activities, Office of Justice Programs, State and Local Law Enforcement Assistance may be used in contravention of Section 642 of the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act of 1996, 8 U.S.C. 1373.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Immigration enforcement, whether issuing it or revoking a visa, deportation, and even providing citizenship, is a federal responsibility and should remain so. However, our law enforcement in cities and states are sometimes the first line of defense in these federal courts. In 1996, almost 20 years ago, Congress passed the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act. This bill not only required localities to communicate with federal agencies when legal and illegal aliens may have been picked up for crimes, but also provided money to help them do so. Since then, additional programs such as the Criminal Alien Assistance Program and Secure Communities have been implemented to ensure further that localities have the resources they need to meet their responsibilities. And the federal government has stated time and again that participation in these programs is not optional. Yet despite that, some cities and even whole states blatantly ignore federal requirements. What is even worse is that these sanctuary cities still receive money for their so-called immigration efforts under State Criminal Alien Assistance Program. In fact, one city received $1.1 million at the same time it designated itself as a city and county of refuge. And one state has even passed laws that prohibit law enforcement agencies from detecting or apprehending those in violation of U.S. immigration laws. For this reason, today I am offering an amendment that would prohibit the Department of Justice from providing funds to these sanctuary cities for immigration enforcement efforts. This is a smart amendment that will require America's local law enforcement officers to do just that, enforce the laws we pass to receive the money we provide them to do so. And I urge the House to vote in its favor. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. Who seeks time? Gentleman from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in opposition to the amendment which provides that none of the funds in the SCAP program can be used in contravention of existing law. This amendment is like several others we've considered today that simply says either the obvious, which is federal funds can't be used in violation of federal law, in which case the amendment is unnecessary and accomplishes nothing, or the amendment seeks to go beyond existing law and set new policy, in which case the policy that it would set is one that is disadvantageous to states and local law enforcement. States and local community safety policies prioritize budgetary and law enforcement resources according to community needs while still permitting federal immigration enforcement to take place. In many cases, such local laws support community safety by encouraging citizens who are crime victims or witnesses to come forward and work with police regardless of their immigration status. These local policies don't interfere with federal enforcement. In fact, a 2007 Justice Department audit of such laws found that in each instance where cities were so-called sanctuary cities, the local policy either didn't preclude cooperation with ICE or else included a policy to the effect that those agencies and officers must assist ICE or share information with ICE as required by federal law. That year, DHS Secretary Michael Chertoff testified before Congress, quote, "I'm not aware of any city, although I may be wrong, that actually interferes with our ability to enforce the law." The amendment would, if it went beyond the mere statement that you can't spend federal funds in contravention of federal law, might deny funding to already cash-strapped police departments. And for these reasons, we urge a no vote on the amendment. And I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Questions on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Illinois. Those in favor signify so by saying aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it, and the amendment is adopted. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from California.
Thank you much. I move to strike the last word, and Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
For 5 minutes.
I have an amendment.
Gentleman will suspend. Does the gentleman have an amendment?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Can the gentleman specify the amendment? Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment offered by Mr. Rohrabacher of California. At the end of the bill, before the short title, insert the following
Mr. Chairman,
section.
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman suspend. The clerk will read.
None of the funds made available in this act to the Department of Justice may be used with respect to the states of Alaska, Arizona, California, Colorado, Delaware, District of Columbia, Hawaii, Maine, Maryland, Michigan, Montana, Nevada, New Jersey, New Mexico, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Washington to prevent such states from implementing their own state laws that authorize the use, distribution, possession, or cultivation of medical marijuana.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes in support of his
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I rise today along with Mr. Hinchey, Mr. McClintock, and Mr. Farr in support of a common-sense amendment that would prohibit the Department of Justice from using funds to prevent states from implementing their own state laws that authorize the use, distribution, possession, or cultivation of medical marijuana. This amendment would take a step in the right direction of respecting states' rights, individual liberties, would help the federal government prioritize its very scarce resources, and show compassion for those thousands of ailing patients across our country. To date, 17 states, including the District of Columbia, have passed laws allowing for the medical use of marijuana. The list continues to grow. Connecticut is in the process of passing a similar law as well. Many of these state laws, including in my own home state of California, have passed these statutes through the initiative process, meaning the majority of California voters specifically decided that sick individuals ought to have the right to use this herb for medical purposes. Why the federal government continues its hardline prohibition, then, is completely beyond me. As far as the medical marijuana is concerned, individuals ought to have a right and ought to be able to act in accordance with their respective state laws without the federal government coming in and interfering. Neither should the federal government threaten to prosecute state employees who are carrying out the implementation of their state laws. Indeed, the Founding Fathers wanted criminal law to be the domain of local and state government. Unfortunately, however, this is not the approach that recent administrations have taken, including the current administration. For example, the governor of Washington State received a letter from the Department of Justice and was warned that, and I quote, "state employees who conducted activities mandated by the Washington legislative proposals would not be immune from the liability under the CSA, end of quote. Additionally, the DEA has conducted numerous raids on medical marijuana dispensaries that are in full compliance with state law. Business people and cooperatives who are licensed and certified within these states to function as legitimate medical marijuana dispensaries have seen their businesses locked down, assets frozen, businesses driven away, and in some cases, the victims of a SWAT squad coming into their operation. It is simply outrageous that we are spending scarce federal dollars to interfere with the medical needs of individuals, especially when it's been recommended by a physician and approved by the voters of a state. Importantly, this amendment does nothing to prevent the federal government from being able to go after drug traffickers. In fact, it makes it easier because it prioritizes and gives those people a chance to go after drug traffickers rather than sick people. Under this amendment, the DEA would still have the power to arrest anyone selling marijuana for recreational use or engaging in any activity that is not expressly allowed under state law. But they will have more time to go after the drug traffickers if they're not going after people who are providing medical marijuana to people who are sick. It is time that we respect states' rights, get serious about prioritizing our federal government's activities, and show some common sense and compassion when dealing with the sick among us. I urge all my members to vote yes for the Rohrabacher-Hinchley-McClintock-Farr amendment to prevent the Department of Justice from continuing to engage in activities that it has no business engaging in.
Questions on the amendment offered? What purpose does the gentleman from Virginia seek recognition?
I rise in opposition to the amendment.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Not only does this amendment, what does this amendment say if a young person, 15, at a high school in whatever state, is watching the House at 7:30 and they say the United States Congress is ready to make it easy to get marijuana, and the mom or dad just said, what is going on? This amendment hurts law enforcement. Our law enforcement people are jeopardizing their lives. Marijuana is one of the most widely abused drugs in the United States. According to the DEA, more young people are now in treatment for marijuana dependency than for alcohol or all other illegal drugs combined. This amendment does not address the problem of marijuana abuse and possibly makes it worse by sending a message to young people that there can be health benefits. The Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, describes marijuana as, quote, the top revenue generator for Mexican drug trafficking organizations, a cash crop that finances corruption and the carnage of violence year after year, end of quote. All you have to do is look at the news. That's why we put money back in here for the National Gang Intelligence Unit to keep the Mexican gangs from coming into the United States. The Mexican gangs are being funded and they have the marijuana operation. I don't understand. I mean, I respect it maybe for medical use at a time, and I will tell you, the first time this issue came up, I voted for it. But it was on a narrow basis, but this is wide open. And then you're going to tell your 15-year-old or 16-year-old, don't use drugs. Well, we got the marijuana center downtown, and everybody's going in. The FDA has stated that, quote, smoked cannabis has no acceptable medical use and treatment in the United States. I could go on, but I think that the message that this amendment would send to young people is that Congress wants to aid and abet, if you will. And we all know, we watched 60 Minutes, we've watched all these shows. If somebody purely, really, you know, my mom died of cancer. So many people in my family died of cancer. It was so narrow, like, but this is just wide open. And we've seen it where they're coming in and they're pouring over. And in essence, I think this would be bad for the country. In our hearings, we had that more young people were dying from overdose of drugs. Then marijuana, then do we go into heroin? Because then and then we go into OxyContin. You just saw today's Washington Post where some of the drug companies were promoting these pain operations, which are basically moving and pushing OxyContin, hiring some really prominent lawyers in this town to represent them. This would not be a good amendment for the country. It would be a bad amendment for the young people, and I urge defeat of the amendment. And yield back to
time's expired. Gentleman from New York. For purposes of the gentleman from New York, seek recognition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Does the gentleman move to strike the last word?
I move to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I rise today in strong support of this amendment, and I thank particularly my friend from California for offering it with me and for what he said about it just a few minutes ago, very clearly. This amendment is very simple. It directs the federal government to respect the laws enacted by states that have legalized marijuana for medical use. The Constitution of the United States is very clear. It authorizes states' rights in every other area that is not specifically designated to the federal government. Currently, 16 states and the District of Columbia have legalized medical marijuana, benefiting over 730,000 patients nationwide. In addition, the state of Connecticut will soon sign a similar bill into law. President Obama has made it clear that the Justice Department should not prioritize medical marijuana arrests, especially when there are so many other more significant issues that need attention. Unfortunately, some in the DEA clearly didn't get the memo. That's why we're here today. According to Americans for Safe Access, since October 2009, the Justice Department has carried out an estimated 170 raids of medical marijuana dispensaries and cultivation centers in 9 states that have legalized medical marijuana. Without a doubt, these raids are clearly a waste of taxpayer dollars, but they are also fundamentally wrong. Medical marijuana is proven to reduce pain and increase quality of life for patients suffering from debilitating diseases, including cancer, multiple sclerosis, and HIV/AIDS. Medical marijuana is a safe and effective treatment for many of the symptoms that accompany these diseases. However, the DEA wants to deny patients medicine that can dramatically improve their lives or reduce their suffering. This is wrong, and it needs to stop. This amendment does not do anything to advocate any violations of the law. It just says those states that have approved medical marijuana ought to be able to determine how to take care of their own people effectively. This amendment does not affect states that have not approved medical marijuana. It does not require or encourage other states to adopt medical marijuana laws. This amendment does not stop law enforcement officials from prosecuting the illegal use of marijuana. This amendment does not encourage drug use in children. Studies actually suggest that teen use of marijuana has declined in states that have passed medical marijuana laws. That in and of itself is very interesting and important. The purpose of this amendment is to allow these 16 states to give relief to people suffering from horrific diseases without fearing federal intervention or prosecution. I urge members to support this amendment and support states' rights and compassion. Doctors in these 16 states know what is best for their patients. The DEA should not stand in the way of these doctors and their patients. All of this is serious situations for the health and safety of many, many people in these 16 states. And in fact, other states are coming into this as well. This is something that really needs to be enacted because it is safe and secure and reasonable. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from California. Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of the Rohrabacher, Hinchey, Farr, and now McClintock amendment. It is obvious from the votes that we've been casting here yesterday and tonight, this afternoon, that this body insists on protecting rights of states to define marriage. This body insists on protecting the rights of states to set abortion policies. This body insists on protecting rights of states to determine education curricula and standards. Just yesterday, this body decided that certain states get to enforce federal immigration laws however they see fit. But when it comes to protecting the rights of states to set medical scope of practice laws, this body balks. All of a sudden, states no longer have the right to determine what is best for their citizens, and when those rights include medical marijuana. The Rohrabacher, Hinchey, Farr, McClintock amendment doesn't change federal law. It doesn't change drug policy. However, it does protect states' rights. For those of you who come from states that do not have medical marijuana laws, nothing in this amendment will impact your state. Everything in your state remains exactly status quo. For those of you who come from states that do have medical marijuana laws, and that means the state of Alaska, Arizona, California, my own state. And it's interesting what we've done in California. We decriminalized the possession of medical marijuana. It's an infraction, not a felony. We also legalized the use of marijuana for medical purposes. But the voters at the same time turned down a intensive legalization use. So it's very controlled. The laws are tight, and they are enforced. The other states that have passed laws are Colorado, Delaware, District of Columbia, Hawaii, Maine, Maryland, Michigan, Montana, Nevada, New Jersey, New Mexico, Oregon, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Washington. Well, for your states, very little in this amendment will impact your state, except that you will now have a state that will be able to implement the laws without fear of retribution or retaliation from the federal government. I also note that in addition to the 16 states I've just mentioned, the state of Connecticut just passed a medical marijuana bill last week, and the governor said he'll sign it. So to the list of 16 states, we soon have added number 17, the state of Connecticut. If states' rights aren't a good enough reason to pass this amendment, then do it because of compassion. Compassion demands it. We offer this amendment for terminal cancer patients, for AIDS victims, for persons who suffer chronic pain. We offer this amendment not only to protect those people, but we offer this amendment to protect the states that are progressive enough to provide alternative medical options to those who need it. I urge all my colleagues to support the Rohrabacher, Hinchey, Farr amendment. Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman yields over his time. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from California.
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, I rise in support of the amendment, and I want to share a slightly different perspective on it. I served as Assistant U.S. Attorney in Los Angeles for 6 years. In 1987, when I started in the office had a guideline where we wouldn't take a case involving less than a kilo of cocaine for prosecution. Now, that didn't mean that it didn't go prosecuted, but it did mean that it was referred to the district attorney's office. We just didn't have the resources to go after every cocaine case involving less than a kilogram. Well, a couple years later into my tenure in that office, we had to raise the guideline to 5 kilograms because we had so many 1 kilogram cases we couldn't handle even those prosecutions. I don't know what the policy is now, whether it's 10 kilograms or 20 kilograms, but the reality is we have very finite resources within the Justice Department to prosecute drug cases. And in that limited world, and of course The funds for drug prosecutions have to compete with the funds for terrorism cases and carjacking cases and bank robberies and T-check thefts or whatnot. We are in a limited resource world, and I don't think it's a good use of our federal law enforcement resources to be prosecuting medical marijuana cases in states that have legalized medical marijuana. On the priority list of federal law enforcement priorities, that ought to be near the very bottom, and at a time when we can't even keep up with the more serious narcotics cases and when we have so many other unmet needs in the Justice Department, this is not where we should be putting our resources, and I urge support for the amendment and yield back.
The gentleman yields back.
I'd move to strike the last word.
Gentleman from New York is recognized. For what purpose does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
I move to strike the last word, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to congratulate and thank the sponsors of this amendment for introducing this amendment. It begins to break down the taboo in American politics about discussing drug policy intelligently. It also begins to hopefully result in the federal government having a more humane and human policy on medical marijuana. I heard the gentleman from Virginia say that the DEA says there is no medical use for marijuana. That's true. They've said it. The DEA has no credibility with people who've looked at this on this subject or most subjects with respect to drugs these days. One reason there is no proof of successful medical use of marijuana is because the DEA systematically tries to make sure there's no adequate research on that, denies the use of supplies of marijuana for medical research. But we have ample proof from the 16 states which have legalized the medical use of marijuana. We have ample anecdotal proof. We know that for people suffering pain, for people suffering nausea from AIDS and cancer, for many people, marijuana is the only thing that produces relief and enables them to eat and to get sustenance and to regain weight and to perhaps regain health. We know this. We know this from thousands of cases. The DEA doesn't know it because it refuses to see it and refuses to allow systematic research. That's wrong. It's inhumane. Now, it may be that I wish this amendment didn't specify the 16 states instead of, because maybe a 17th and an 18th will come along in this year. I hope it will. But certainly the federal government has a better use for its resources than trying to prevent the policy that 16 states have adopted, the humane policy of allowing the medical use of something that has been proven to be medically useful in many cases to prevent that. Doctors and other medical professionals ought to determine treatment, not bureaucrats in Washington. So I support this amendment, and I hope that maybe if it passes, maybe if we have a rational policy with regard to medical marijuana, maybe two other things will happen. Maybe the DEA will get its head out of the sand and will permit proper research, so we'll get better research and better results, and maybe also we'll begin a discussion of our general drug policy toward marijuana, which is certainly a much, much more benign drug than alcohol, which is legal, than tobacco, which is legal, and we have a very irrational policy toward it, a policy which reminds one of the policy in the 1920s that had such deleterious effects with regard to alcohol and alcohol use. So I congratulate the sponsor of this amendment for having the courage to help break the taboos concerning this subject and for introducing an amendment that, if it passes, will result in many, many thousands of people being more healthful and more comfortable, and will be a great thing for this country. I thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks time? Gentleman from Tennessee.
Thank you, sir. I move to strike the last
Gentleman
word.
is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There have been quite a few good arguments made, excellent arguments for the reason that this amendment should pass. Justice Louis Brandeis is one of my favorite justices, and he said the laboratories of democracy are the states. And indeed, 16 states, mostly through, if not entirely through, referenda, have determined that they wanted to try to find out whether medical marijuana laws would work. The federal government should not be infringing on what the states have determined and their citizens have determined in the most direct form of democracy that this nation knows, state referenda. And the federal government has been using its resources that could be used in better ways to police the jurisdictions that have voted it in. That's what this amendment does, is it says there will not be any additional spending of federal monies to try to thwart the will of the people of the states on issues in which they have voted. This is the most basic democracy that we could be talking about. You talk about the Founding Fathers, this is the people who give us power. They have voted in their states to make it the law, and the federal government has taken its heavy hand and tried to come in there and have come in there and prosecuted individuals. It's for the state to prosecute those individuals if they want. As the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, has pointed out, federal priorities have to be made to meet the resources available. The monies that they're spending now in these states could be spent on border traffic, could be spent on policing against heroin and cocaine, which cause people, when they get hooked, to commit violent crimes to get their money to buy their drugs. That's never been known to be the case with marijuana, and is not the case with marijuana. That's where our priorities for law enforcement should go and prosecution should go, is crack and cocaine and heroin, and they're not being used there. So this is a common sense, basic democratic proposal to tell our federal government that has gone astray to not use its resources against the people of this country who've made this determination. Now, as far as some of the other statements that have been made, I think the public who listens knows that this is not about legalization. This is not about 14-year-olds or 15-year-olds or 18-year-olds. It's about states, democracy, doctors, and people who have cancer, glaucoma, AIDS, MS, whatever. Montel Williams has testified how it's helped him with his illness. I had a Navy SEAL friend who died of cancer. There is no question but that marijuana, which he smoked, helped him with his appetite when he wasn't eating, and his pancreatic cancer took him from 215 pounds to 115. And his grandmother said, it's the only thing that makes Oral laugh, and it's the only thing that makes Oral eat. And when he was dying, my friend, I wanted him to have whatever it could have to make his illness less damaging to him and less difficult to deal with. So I rise here and to assure people that it won't affect your states. It'll just be those states where it's been voted in. It will save resources and be able to give our government the proper direction to use its resources to protect us against heroin, crack, and cocaine. I yield back the remainder of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks time? Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Mr. Chairman, I salute...
Does the gentleman seek to strike the last word?
I seek to strike the last word.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Actually, Mr. Chairman, if I could, I would strike many of the words we've heard today. I first want to acknowledge the leadership of my colleague from California. He has a characteristic that is all too rare in politics, an intellectual consistency. We have people who, on the one hand, talk about freedom and individual liberty and respect for states' rights, but when it comes up against some pet project of theirs, all that goes out the window. Let's be very clear. This is not a case of people advocating that other people smoke marijuana. It is, for me, an advocacy that we allow people some degree of free choice. I listened to the gentleman from Virginia, and I admire his diligence, but I have to say I disagreed with almost everything he said. There was one thing he said that I thought was appropriate. He said we shouldn't be debating this at 7:30, and I agree. We should have been debating it at 4:20. That would have been a much better time. But other than that, he says, what about 15-year-olds? They'll see marijuana centers. Well, they'll see liquor stores. They'll see many more liquor stores than marijuana centers. The notion that because something is inappropriate for a teenager or a child, adults should not be allowed to use it is mindlessness. You can't run a society that says we're not going to let a 15-year-old see the things a 15-year-old can't do. Liquor stores would be a great example. I have been disappointed on this point in the Obama administration. The Clinton administration was quite sensible on this. The Bush administration slipped back, and I had hoped that with the Obama administration it would be more sensible. The gentleman from Virginia said, well, this is a great source of money for the Mexicans. Sure, because we won't let people grow it in America. To the extent that people are buying medical marijuana from Mexican drug cartels, I think a somewhat luridly overdone thing with regard to this, that's because we have had people refusing to allow them to grow it here in America for that use. People say, and again, I'm surprised to some of my conservative friends, well, there's no medical value. The federal government now becomes the arbiter and tells the states, you may not make that judgment that there's medical value. We know an awful lot of people think it has medical value for them as to addiction and the notion that, oh, you get all these drugs together. What marijuana has in common with OxyContin, which the gentleman from Virginia mentioned, and other drugs, is that we treat them the same. They're not the same in any rational way. They're not the same in addictive prospects. They're not the same except that we treat them the same, and we're the ones, by this foolish policy that I regret the administration I support is engaging in, who give people the notion that they're the same thing. It's a very simple point. People in the states have voted that marijuana should be available for people who want to use it for medicinal purposes, and the states are then in charge of setting up ways to deal with it. And we have people out of their ideological opposition announcing that they will not be allowed to do that, that they will tell people that it has no medical use despite the testimony of so many who think it does. This, again, is a form that I thought we learned didn't work, and it's prohibition of the worst sort. And, by the way, it is going to lead to very ineffective law enforcement because we are a free country. You cannot impose in a free society like ours a regime of law enforcement that the public rejects without a great deal of repression. State by state by state, the people of the state have voted to allow this. So when we send the federal agents in to disregard what the state did, to disregard state law, of course you're going to engender resistance. Of course you're going to engender people going around. I have to say, and I would just close by saying, to listen to this debate, I think tonight C-SPAN has merged with the Turner movie classics, because Reefer Madness, that great movie from the 30s, appears to be being shown on both channels. This notion that because 15-year-olds are watching us talk about how people who are ill and in pain should be allowed with the vote of the state to get marijuana prescribed by a doctor, and that's going to lead a 15-year-old to go out and do it, makes no logical sense. And as I said, if you're worried about what 15-year-olds can see, they can see X-rated movies that are being advertised. They can see cigarettes being sold widely. They can see alcohol. They can see all manner of things that we don't want them to do. This is a very sensible amendment. No one has shown, let me say finally, and you know the DEA, they want to do this. I have not seen the evidence that says that medical marijuana has led to any problem. I haven't seen it linked to crime. I haven't seen it linked to anything negative. What we have, frankly, are some prejudices being used to interfere with people's rights.
Gentleman's time has expired. Who seeks time? Gentlelady from California.
Thank you. I rise to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong support of this bipartisan amendment. I want to thank Mr. Rohrabacher and all of the co-sponsors of this amendment for their leadership and for bringing this amendment forward. This amendment would prohibit the Department of Justice from using federal funds to prevent the implementation of state laws authorizing the use of medical marijuana. In recent months, the federal government has stepped up raids on legally operating clinics in many states where it is permissible for seriously ill patients to be prescribed medical marijuana by their doctors. These raids are shutting down legally operating businesses and are putting the health and the well-being of patients with cancer, HIV and AIDS, multiple sclerosis, and other serious illnesses in jeopardy. Marijuana has proven medical uses that improves the quality of life and extends the lives of desperately ill people. By shutting down clinics, Federal agents are forcing patients who may be dying, for example, of cancer, out into the streets to buy prescription drugs like narcotics, which oftentimes leads to prescription drug addiction. These raids also undermine the ability of states to faithfully implement the will of their voters. The people in my home state of California have voted to make medical marijuana legal. These laws have been enacted to allow patients safe and legal access to appropriately produce and dispense medical marijuana in the safest possible environment. Yet in the last 18 months, for whatever reason, the Drug Enforcement Administration has raided and shut down many licensed and regulated dispensaries, which are legal, mind you, under state law. For example, the Berkeley Patients Group in my district, which had worked closely with the City of Berkeley to stay in compliance with local and state laws in order to serve critically ill patients in my community, has been forced to close its doors and turn their patients away. Complying with the state law and relying on a memorandum from the Department of Justice, thousands of small businesses across my state have invested millions in dollars in building their businesses, created good-paying jobs, and have paid millions in taxes. The business owners in my home district are doing everything they can to comply with the law, but clinics in Oakland and Berkeley continue to be subject to raids by federal authorities. Many of my colleagues and I have made repeated requests to the Department of Justice to seek clarification regarding their enforcement policies on medical marijuana. Mr. Chair, this is about recognizing the will of the voters. The federal crackdowns ignore the will of the voters in 16 states across the nation. The clinics, doctors, and businesses which bring medicine, mind you, to suffering patients need clarity, certainty, and an end to arbitrary raids. We should be protecting, not undermining our democracy by prosecuting small business owners who pay taxes and comply with state laws and providing medicine to people in need. But really, most importantly, it should be compassion for our fellow Americans suffering from serious illness that compel us to vote for this amendment. It is the humane thing to do, and it is the right thing to do. And so I want to thank Mr. Rohrabacher once again and the co-sponsors of this amendment for bringing this forward tonight, and I urge and I vote.
Who seeks time? Gentleman from Colorado.
Mr. Chair, I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from California for bringing forth this amendment. This amendment is absolutely critical for Colorado. We have a legal regulatory structure for medical marijuana. Many businesses and nonprofits that are active in providing patients with medical marijuana, and yet they live under constant fear of selective enforcement from the Attorney General or from the DEA. I had the opportunity in the Judiciary Committee to question the Attorney General with regard to this issue, and he acknowledged that the only possible enforcement because of the large-scale use of medical marijuana in the states where it is legal would be selective enforcement. And it's a very dangerous precedent, a very dangerous power to hand an Attorney General, a Department of Justice, and a DEA. I have heard from the other side of the aisle in different contexts many comments critical of the current Attorney General. But regardless of who is sitting as Attorney General, do we want to have an Attorney General that has the ability at any given time to engage in selective enforcement against a large group of people whomever he or she wants to prosecute? What if the selective enforcement is politically motivated? What if we have an Attorney General that decides he or she doesn't like the Tea Party or doesn't like the Occupy movement? What if they then force the states to give the records that they keep of who has the medical marijuana licenses and then goes after the people with whose politics they don't agree? It's a very, very dangerous road to go down, a dangerous power to give to the federal government. This is a very real and important issue. Drug abuse is a terrible problem, plagues our country, plagues Colorado families. We can reduce drug abuse and reduce access to minors of both marijuana as well as other drugs by making sure that we regulate them appropriately. In Colorado, medical marijuana dispensaries are regularly audited. They are required under state law to have video cameras to keep track of who comes and goes. Minors are not allowed to enter the premise. It is, of course, the underground illegal corner drug dealer that will sell to the 15-year-old, not the legal state-regulated dispensary. We have limited law enforcement capabilities, as highlighted by my colleague from California, Mr. Schiff. And to go after patients and their caregivers rather than drug smugglers and Mexican drug cartels does a huge disservice not only to law enforcement but also to the many, many victims of the drug war, both from collateral damage as well as those who fall victim to drugs themselves. It's critical at a time when our nation continues to battle with narcotic use that our limited resources are focused on the real problem. The real problem is not the 68-year-old cancer patient. The real problem is not the business or the nonprofit that operates under a legal state regulatory system in providing these essential services in our communities in accordance with state and local law. This amendment is common sense. I hope that colleagues on both sides of the aisle join in passing this amendment. And I understand that for many of our colleagues, they don't yet have or they don't have legal medical marijuana in their states. And that's fine. No one's saying they should or they shouldn't. It's up to the residents of each state to decide how they want to treat the criminal aspects of regulating marijuana use. What we're asking is, for those of you who come from states who don't have legal marijuana, consider that some states might think about it a little differently. Consider that some states have, in fact, authorized dispensaries and authorized a system to ensure that it stays out of the hands of minors, to focus their state law enforcement resources on harder drugs and ensuring that minors don't have access to marijuana or other drugs. And consider that that is their prerogative, just as it is your prerogative in your state to continue to approach marijuana usage as a criminal issue. I call upon my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support this important amendment, to focus our limited resources and allow legal businesses and legal caregivers to operate without the fear of a DEA agent busting in their door. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from Virginia.
I'll just strike the requisite number of words.
The gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
I hear people talking about